The weight of a wedding gift should be measured in love, not in gold. It's a simple, almost childish sentiment, one I used to believe with the unwavering conviction of a person who had lived a good, simple life. It took my daughter's wedding day, the single most expensive day I had ever financed, for me to finally understand that in the world she now inhabited, my love was considered worthless currency. The silence in my house now is a different kind of silence than the one I grew accustomed to after my husband, Robert, passed away. That was a silence of grief, heavy and thick with memories, but also layered with the lingering echoes of love and a life well lived. This new silence is sharp, brittle, and cold. It is the silence of a phone that does not ring, of emails that do not arrive, of a door that is never knocked upon. It is the silence of a severed connection, a chasm that opened up with the sound of a single, cruel laugh. I often find myself in Robert's old armchair, a cup of tea grown cold on the coaster beside me, simply staring at the wall. On that wall hangs a portrait of my daughter, Clara, from her university graduation. Her smile is wide and genuine, her eyes bright with the promise of a future I was so proud to have helped build for her. I look at that girl and I wonder where she went. I wonder when the gratitude in her heart was hollowed out and replaced with something else, something harder and more grasping. The world tells us that a mother's love is unconditional, a boundless well from which a child can draw forever without fear of it running dry. For 68 years, I believed that. I lived it. I poured everything I had, emotionally and financially, into that well for Clara. And I learned, with breathtaking finality, that every well has a bottom. Mine was discovered in a grand, ostentatiously decorated ballroom, under the warm glow of chandeliers I had paid for, surrounded by people whose dinners I had funded, at the precise moment my son-in-law held up my heart, my history, and my love and laughed. My life with Robert was not one of extravagance, but of quiet, determined purpose. We were both children of pragmatic, hard-working parents, who had weathered the lean years and taught us the value of $1 earned and $1 saved. Robert was an engineer, methodical and brilliant, with hands that could fix anything and a mind that saw the world in elegant, logical systems. I was a bookkeeper for a small, local firm, a woman who understood the language of ledgers and balance sheets, who found a serene satisfaction in making columns of figures align perfectly. Together, we were a formidable team. We bought a modest house in a decent neighborhood, a simple brick colonial with a sturdy oak in the front yard. We didn't take lavish vacations or drive flashy cars. Our joy was found in simpler things, tending our garden, long walks after dinner, and the shared project of building a secure future. Our greatest project, of course, was Clara. From the moment she was born, she was the sun around which our small universe revolved. We weren't just saving for our retirement, we were saving for her. The Clara Fund, as Robert called it, was a separate account we contributed to every month without fail. It was for her education, her first car, a down payment on a home, a safety net to ensure she would have a launchpad into life far more stable than the one we had. Robert would often sit at the kitchen table late at night, poring over stock market reports. He wasn't a gambler, he was a student. "It's about compound interest, Eleanor," he'd say, his face lit by the small desk lamp. "It's about patience. We buy good, solid companies and we let time do the work for us." He bought shares in names that were pillars of the economy, utilities, consumer goods, technology firms that were just beginning to shape the world. He taught me how it all worked, showing me how our small, disciplined investments were slowly, steadily growing into a formidable nest egg. When Clara was small, he wrote her letters. He wasn't a man of effusive daily affection, but in these letters, he poured out all his hopes for her. He wrote about integrity, kindness, the importance of being true to oneself. He told her stories of her grandparents and great-grandparents, wanting her to feel rooted in the love of the family that came before her. He sealed them in envelopes and put them in a wooden box, telling me, for her wedding day, or maybe when she has her own first child. A day when she'll need to know where she comes from. When Robert was diagnosed with cancer, our world tilted on its axis. The logic and order we had built our lives upon dissolved into a terrifying chaos of hospital visits, treatments, and hushed conversations with doctors. Through it all, his main concern was us. "The finances are in order, Eleanor," he whispered to me one night, his voice thin and raspy. "Everything is in your name. Don't let anyone, not even Clara, rush you into decisions. You're smarter than you think." His biggest fear was that his illness would deplete the savings we had worked so hard to build. Thanks to his diligent planning and good insurance, it didn't. But the cost was him. After he was gone, the house felt enormous and hollow. The silence was a physical presence. My only solace was Clara. She was in college then, and I threw myself into supporting her, ensuring his loss didn't derail her future. I doubled down on my promise to him. I would look after our girl. I managed our portfolio with the same care and prudence Robert had taught me. I lived modestly, my own needs secondary. The Clara Fund became simply the fund, and it continued to grow, a silent testament to Robert's foresight and my stewardship. I saw it not as my money, but as our family's legacy, a tool to provide Clara with security and happiness. I never imagined it would one day be used as a weapon against me. Clara met Marcus during her final semester of law school. She brought him home for a weekend, and my first impression was one of polished perfection. He was handsome in a way that seemed assembled by a committee, perfect teeth, an expensive haircut, a suit that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment had been. He came from a family that had made its money quickly in real estate development. They were loud, ostentatious people who measured worth by the square footage of a house or the brand name on a handbag. Marcus had that same veneer. He spoke smoothly, peppering his conversation with the names of exclusive clubs and trendy vacation spots. He looked around our simple, comfortable home with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a flicker of something that might have been pity, or perhaps disdain. He called me Mrs. Vance with a chilling formality, never once attempting the warmer, more familiar Eleanor. I tried to like him, for Clara's sake. I told myself his confidence was a good thing, that his ambition would be a good match for her own. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was appraising everything, including me, and finding it all somehow lacking. The change in Clara was subtle at first. She started talking more about money, not in the practical, forward-thinking way Robert and I had, but in terms of acquisition and display. She'd call and talk about the fabulous charity gala Marcus's parents had thrown, the incredible car his father had just bought, the summer trip to Tuscany they were planning. Then came the first direct request. "Mom," she said one afternoon, her voice casual, a little too casual. "Marcus thinks my old car is a bit, well, you know. It doesn't make the best impression when I'm meeting with clients from the firm. We were looking at a new Lexus, and the down payment is just a little steep right now." I remembered the reliable Honda we had bought her for graduation, the one with only 30,000 miles on it. I felt a prickle of unease. "What's wrong with the Honda, honey? It's a perfectly good car." "Oh, nothing's wrong with it," she said, a new, dismissive edge to her voice that I hadn't heard before. "It's just not. It's not the right image. Marcus says image is everything in his world. Not her world, or their world. His." Against my better judgment, I wrote the check. It was for $5,000. I justified it as a late graduation present, a dip into the funds Robert and I had always intended for her. But it felt different. It didn't feel like giving, it felt like paying. The requests, small at first, began to multiply. It was a new wardrobe for her job at a prestigious, high-powered law firm. "Mom, I can't show up looking like I shop at department stores." Marcus's mother took me to her personal shopper. That was another $10,000, transferred from my brokerage account to hers. Then it was helping them secure a lease on a luxury apartment in the city's most expensive district. The address is so important for our social life, Mom. It's an investment in our future. I paid the security deposit and the first 2 months' rent, a sum that would have covered our own mortgage for half a year. Each time, I felt a knot of resentment tighten in my stomach, a feeling I immediately felt guilty for. This was my daughter, my only child. This was what Robert and I had worked for. My best friend, Margaret, a sharp-witted widow like myself who had known me since before Clara was born, was less sentimental. "Eleanor, you're being a fool," she told me over coffee one morning, her honesty a splash of cold water. "You're not helping her. You're enabling them. That young man is a parasite, and he's teaching your daughter how to be one too." I defended Clara, of course. "She's just starting out. It's a competitive world," but Margaret just shook her head, her eyes full of pity for my blindness. "The world has always been competitive. That's not an excuse for greed." The engagement was announced at a lavish party hosted by Marcus's parents at their sprawling, sterile mansion. The diamond on Clara's finger was enormous, a gaudy stone that seemed to weigh down her delicate hand. I felt a surge of happiness for her, but it was quickly submerged by a wave of anxiety. I knew what was coming. A week later, they sat across from me at my own dining room table, the same table where Robert and I had planned our modest life. They had a glossy binder with them, tabbed and organized. On the cover, in elegant script, it read, "The wedding of Clara and Marcus." Marcus did most of the talking, his voice smooth and practiced, as if he were delivering a pitch to an investor. Clara sat beside him, nodding, her eyes fixed on the binder, avoiding mine. "We have a vision, Mrs. Vance," Marcus began, "for a truly unforgettable event. One that reflects not just our love, but also our family's standing in the community." He opened the binder. Inside were pictures of fairytale venues, designer gowns, and floral arrangements that looked like they belonged in a palace. Then came the spreadsheets. My heart sank as I saw the figures. The venue, a historic country club favored by the city's elite, had a booking fee of $30,000. The catering was quoted at $200 per person, for a guest list of 250. The photographer, a so-called artist who was in high demand, charged a flat fee of $15,000. The flowers, the band, the lighting, the wedding planner, the list went on and on. The bottom line figure made the air leave my lungs: $168,000. I stared at it, speechless. My entire life with Robert, we had never spent a sum like that on anything, not even our house. "This is," I started, trying to find the right word. "This is a lot." Clara finally spoke, her voice soft, wheedling. "We know, Mom. But it's our dream wedding. And Marcus's parents are being so generous. They are covering the rehearsal dinner, and our honeymoon to the Maldives." She paused, and then delivered the line I had been dreading. "We were hoping you could help with the main event. As your gift to us." My gift. Not a toaster, or a set of fine china. A gift of $168,000. Marcus leaned forward, his expression a careful mask of sincerity. "Of course, we don't expect you to cover all of it. We've been saving, too. We can contribute about $5,000. $5,000. It was an insult. It was less than the cost of the champagne they planned to serve. I felt a hot flash of anger, but I swallowed it down. I looked at my daughter's expectant face, the face I had loved and protected her entire life. How could I say no? How could I deny her her dream wedding? Over the next few days, I sat at my desk, the same one Robert used, and I did the calculations. To free up that kind of cash, I would have to sell a significant portion of the stock portfolio. I would have to liquidate shares that Robert had chosen with such care, stocks that had been the bedrock of our security for decades. I would be cashing in our future to pay for their party. Margaret was apoplectic. "Don't you dare do it, Eleanor," she pleaded over the phone. "Tell them to have the wedding they can afford. Get married at the courthouse and have a party in the backyard, like normal people." This is insanity, but I could already hear Clara's disappointed voice, see her accusing eyes. I could hear Marcus's cool, condescending tone suggesting that I simply didn't understand their lifestyle. The guilt and the pressure were immense. So, with a heavy heart and a trembling hand, I made the calls to my broker. I sold the shares of the steady utility company that had paid dividends like clockwork for 40 years. I sold the block of the technology firm we'd bought into in the 90s, which had grown exponentially. I watched decades of patient saving and careful growth turn into a liquid number in my bank account, a number that felt vast and yet already spent. I transferred the money to a new, separate account. The wedding fund. It felt like a betrayal of Robert, of everything we had built. But I told myself it was for Clara. It was for her happiness. I had no idea then that her happiness and my dignity had become mutually exclusive. Once the money was secured, my role in the wedding planning quickly devolved from mother of the bride to chief financial officer. I was consulted on budgetary matters, but rarely on creative or personal ones. Clara and Marcus would have meetings with the wedding planner, the florist, the caterer, and then present me with the invoices. My opinions were not solicited. I was a signatory on a checkbook, a silent partner in a transaction that was supposedly about family and love. I was being systematically erased from my own daughter's wedding. The most telling incident, the one that should have been my final warning, was about the dress. Not Clara's dress, a $10,000 creation of silk and lace that I was forbidden to see before the wedding day, but my dress. Clara called me one afternoon, her voice bright and businesslike. "Mom, great news. Marcus's mother and I found the perfect dress for you to wear. I've sent you the link." I clicked on the link she sent. The dress was a shapeless, beige sheath. It was matronly, dowdy, and utterly devoid of any style or joy. It was the color of dust. The description unironically called it understated elegance. It was a dress designed to make the wearer disappear, to fade into the wallpaper, so as not to upstage the main event. "It's very simple, honey," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Yes, that's the point," she said cheerfully. "We want a cohesive look. Nothing too flashy. Mrs. Adler says the mothers should look dignified, but not draw attention." Mrs. Adler was Marcus's mother. The fact that she had been consulted on my attire, while I had not, was a sting I felt sharply. I thought of the vibrant, cobalt blue dress I had seen in a boutique window downtown, a color that made me feel alive, that brought out the silver in my hair. I thought of Robert, who always told me I looked best in blue. In a small act of rebellion, my first in this whole sorry process, I went and bought the blue dress. It was elegant, beautifully tailored, and made me feel like myself. When I told Clara, she was audibly annoyed. "Mom, you can't. It will clash with the floral arrangements. Marcus will be upset." "Marcus is not wearing the dress, Clara, I am," I said, a firmness in my voice that surprised us both. "It's a blue dress, not a clown suit. I will be perfectly dignified." There was a frosty silence on the other end of the line before she sighed and said, "Fine. If you insist on making things difficult." By wanting to wear a color I loved, I was making things difficult. It was during this period of growing alienation that I began to think about their wedding gift. The money was for the wedding, the grand spectacle. But the gift, the personal gift from me to them, had to be something different. It had to be something that money couldn't buy. It had to be a reminder of what really mattered, a counterbalance to the rampant materialism that had consumed them. I remembered the box of letters Robert had written. I decided that would be the heart of the gift. I spent weeks in my study, carefully scanning each letter. I compiled them into a single narrative, a father's loving advice to a daughter he would never get to see grow up. I then delved into our family history, calling distant cousins, digging through old photo albums, and using genealogy websites to trace our roots back through generations of farmers, teachers, and tradesmen. People who, like Robert and I, had lived quiet lives of integrity. I put it all together in a beautiful, hand-bound leather book. The cover was embossed with a simple oak tree, our family symbol. Inside, on archival paper, were Robert's letters, the family stories, the old photographs. It was a testament to a legacy of love, not wealth. For the final touch, I wanted to include something of Robert's financial philosophy. I found the original paper stock certificate for the very first shares he had ever bought, 10 shares of a solid, blue-chip company that had been the seed of everything we later built. The certificate itself was a beautiful, engraved piece of paper, a relic from a bygone era. I had it legally transferred into Clara and Marcus's names. It wasn't worth a fortune, maybe a few $1,000s, but its symbolic value was immeasurable. This was the beginning. This was the acorn from which our own oak tree of security had grown. I placed the certificate in a sleeve in the back of the book. This, I thought, was the perfect gift. It was our story. It was Robert's heart. It was a lesson in what it means to build a life. I wrapped it in simple silver paper and tied it with a white ribbon, my heart swelling with a sad, hopeful love. I truly believed, that it would touch them. That it would be the one thing in this whole circus of excess that would feel real. The wedding day arrived, a blur of motion and strained pleasantries. I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of someone else's life. The ceremony at the country club was breathtakingly beautiful, an opulent stage set of white roses and shimmering fabrics. Clara was a stunning bride in her fantastically expensive gown. But as she walked down the aisle, her eyes were fixed only on Marcus. She barely glanced at me as I sat in the front row, a silent, well-dressed benefactor in my defiant blue dress. At the reception, the scale of the extravagance was staggering. A string quartet played during cocktails, a tower of champagne glasses shimmered near the entrance, and the 5-course meal was served with military precision. I mingled as best I could, accepting compliments on the lovely affair, with a tight smile, knowing I was the one who had paid for every petal and every crumb. Then came the speeches and the opening of the gifts. Marcus's parents were first. With a theatrical flourish, his father presented them with a small box. Inside was a key fob. He announced to the cheering crowd that a brand new Porsche was waiting for them outside, a gift to start their journey in style. The crowd roared its approval. Other gifts were announced, exotic vacations, contributions to their stock portfolio, a check from an uncle that was ostentatiously described as very generous. I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. My small, silver-wrapped package sat on the table, looking humble and out of place. Finally, it was my turn. The MC announced, and now, a gift from the mother of the bride, Eleanor Vance. I gave a short, heartfelt speech, my voice trembling slightly. I spoke of Robert, and of how proud he would have been. I spoke of the importance of remembering where you come from as you build your future. I ended by saying, this gift is not one of material value, but of legacy and of love. It is the story of our family, and the foundation upon which it was built. I handed the package to Clara. She unwrapped it carefully, her expression shifting from polite anticipation to confusion as she saw the leather-bound book. She opened it, her brow furrowed. "It's letters," she murmured, flipping through a few pages without reading them. Marcus, impatient, took the book from her hands. He flicked through it with a dismissive air, his lip curling slightly as he glanced at the old, black and white photos of my grandparents. He didn't read a single word of Robert's letters. He reached the back, pulled out the stock certificate, and held it up to the light. He glanced at the company name and the number of shares. Then he scoffed. It was a small sound, but in the expectant quiet of the room, it was as loud as a gunshot. He leaned over to his best man, who was sitting beside him, and in a stage whisper that carried across the head table, he said, "An old book and a handful of stock. I guess she spent all the real money on the canapes." And then, he laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a loud, braying, contemptuous laugh. The best man snickered along with him. The sound hit me with a physical force. It was a punch to the gut that stole the air from my lungs. I looked at Clara, my heart begging her to say something, to defend me, to defend her own father's memory. But she did nothing. She just sat there, her face flushed, looking not at me with love or loyalty, but at Marcus with a kind of embarrassed, apologetic smile. She was mortified not by his cruelty, but by my gift. In that single, horrifying moment, the world shifted. The illusion I had so desperately clung to, that my sacrifices mattered, that my love was valued, shattered into a million pieces. The years of self-denial, the liquidating of Robert's legacy, the quiet humiliations, all of it coalesced into a single point of cold, diamond-hard clarity. They didn't just not appreciate my gift. They held it, and by extension, me, in utter contempt. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The laughter echoed in my ears, mingling with the frantic beating of my own heart. The air in the ballroom felt thick and suffocating. I saw everything with a chilling, hyperreal clarity, the smug, mocking face of my new son-in-law, the weak, complicit silence of my daughter, the curious, pitying stares of the guests at the nearby tables. The humiliation was a physical cloak, heavy and suffocating. But then, something else rose up through the shock and the pain. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, a cold, clean anger. It was the anger of a person who had been pushed too far, who had given everything and received nothing but scorn in return. The years of being a doormat, of writing checks and biting my tongue, of putting Clara's perceived happiness above my own dignity, it all ended right there. The grief I felt for the daughter I had lost was suddenly replaced by a profound and righteous indignation. A strange calm settled over me. The frantic beating in my chest slowed to a steady, resolute rhythm. I was no longer the grieving widow or the doting mother. I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who had paid for this entire grotesque charade, and I was about to shut it down. I stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate. I smoothed the front of my blue dress, the one they hadn't wanted me to wear. Every eye at the head table was on me. Marcus stopped laughing, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Clara looked at me with wide, panicked eyes, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I walked directly to the head table and stood behind Clara's chair. I looked down at the book, my book, lying discarded next to a plate of half-eaten sea bass. I picked it up and held it to my chest. Then I looked at Marcus. "The canapes," I said, my voice low and clear, cutting through the murmurs of the room, "along with the salmon, the champagne, the flowers, the band, and the roof over your head tonight, were all paid for with real money, my money. Money my husband and I worked our entire lives to save. Money that was meant to represent our love and support." I then turned my gaze to Clara. I saw not a trace of remorse in her eyes, only a growing horror at the social scene I was creating. "I thought," I continued, my voice steady, "that a gift of heritage, of your own father's words, might be a welcome anchor in this sea of shallow materialism. I see now that I was mistaken. It seems the only value you understand is the one with a dollar sign in front of it." Without another word to them, I turned and walked away from the table. I pulled my phone from my evening bag. My hands were perfectly steady. I had a list of the vendors in my notes, complete with contact numbers and contract details. I was, after all, a bookkeeper. I was thorough. I stepped into the grand hallway, the sound of the band starting up a cheerful tune behind me. The first call was to the photographer, the $15,000 artist. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Dubois, this is Eleanor Vance," I said calmly. "The contract for the Vance Adler wedding is terminated, effective immediately." Your services are no longer required. Please have your team pack up their equipment and vacate the premises within the next 30 minutes. I will settle the prorated final invoice with you tomorrow. There was a sputtering protest on the other end, but I simply said, my decision is final, and hung up. The second call was to the videographer. The same conversation, the same result. The third call was to the manager of the 10-piece band. I told him their performance was concluded for the evening. He was confused, mentioning their contract ran until 1 a.m. The contract has been rescinded, I stated, by the person who signed it and funded it. Send me your final bill. I walked back to the entrance of the ballroom just in time to see the photographers beginning to pack up their lights and cameras. My final act was to find the venue's catering manager, a harried-looking man I'd signed the main contract with. I found him near the kitchens. The bar is to be closed immediately, I informed him. And dessert service is cancelled. The event is over. He looked at me, aghast. But madam, the guests can go home, I said, my voice as cold as ice. The party is over. The first sign that my actions had registered was the music. It didn't fade out, it simply stopped, mid-song, plunging the room into a cacophony of confused chatter. I stood in the doorway of the ballroom, a sentinel at the edge of the chaos I had created. The photographers were now openly disassembling their equipment, and the videographer was rolling up cables. A wave of murmuring swept through the room as guests turned to each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. Then, I saw Marcus storming towards me. His face was a mask of crimson fury, his polished veneer completely gone. What in God's name do you think you're doing? He hissed, grabbing my arm. I pulled my arm away with a strength that surprised him. I am ending the event I paid for, I said, my voice level. This is no longer a celebration of love or family. It has become a business transaction, and I am closing my account. Clara was right behind him, her face streaked with tears, her perfect makeup ruined. Mother, how could you? She wailed, her voice shrill. You've ruined everything. Everyone is staring. Yes, I imagine they are, I replied, looking past her at the crowd of baffled faces. Perhaps they are wondering why a groom would publicly mock a gift from his bride's mother. Perhaps they are wondering why that bride would sit there and allow it. Marcus stepped forward again, jabbing a finger in my direction. You are embarrassing us. You are embarrassing this family. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. You embarrassed yourselves. You showed everyone in this room your true character. All I am doing is refusing to continue paying for the privilege of being humiliated by you. His father, Mr. Adler, a large, florid man, bustled over. Now see here, Eleanor, he boomed, attempting a placating tone. I'm sure there's just been a misunderstanding. Marcus was just having a little joke. I cut him off, my voice rising for the first time. He laughed at my husband's memory. He laughed at the very foundation of the security your son now so clearly enjoys. There is no misunderstanding. There is only clarity. I turned my attention back to Clara and Marcus. The cold calm was back, and I began to list my contributions with the dispassionate precision of a bookkeeper reading a ledger. The booking fee for this venue, $30,000. The catering for 250 guests at $200 a head, $50,000. The $12,000 for the roses and orchids currently wilting on those tables. The $15,000 photographer, and his $10,000 video counterpart. The $12,000 band that has just packed up their instruments. The $10,000 dress that you, I said, looking directly at Clara, are wearing. The total cost of this dream wedding that I funded comes to over $150,000. A gift? From me. I let that sink in. The color drained from Clara's face. Marcus looked stunned, as if he was hearing the numbers for the first time. My personal gift to you, I continued, holding up the leather-bound book, was my love, my history, and my husband's legacy. You valued it at nothing. So, I am rescinding the gift you do seem to value, the cash. The party is over. You can explain to your 200 guests why the bar is closed and there will be no wedding cake. I turned to leave. Clara grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. Mother, please. Don't do this. What are we supposed to do? I looked at her hand on my arm, then into her eyes. I saw no love there, no regret, only pure, selfish panic. I imagine, I said softly, that you will figure it out. You are, after all, a very resourceful young woman. I pulled my arm free and walked away. As I reached the grand doors of the country club, I heard Marcus shouting behind me, "You'll regret this. You'll be hearing from our lawyer." I didn't turn around. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. My friend Margaret was waiting by the valet stand, holding my coat. She must have seen the whole thing. She didn't say a word, just wrapped the coat around my shoulders. As we walked towards her car, I felt a single tear trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, or of regret. It was a tear of release. The weight of a lifetime of expectations had finally been lifted from my shoulders. The weeks that followed the wedding were defined by a profound and unnerving silence. I expected angry phone calls, text messages filled with recriminations, perhaps even a letter from Marcus's threatened lawyer. But there was nothing. Just a void where my daughter used to be. The silence was, in its own way, more damning than any angry outburst could have been. It confirmed that our relationship had been entirely transactional. With the money tap turned off, there was nothing left to say. I spent the first few days in a daze, going through the motions of life. But as the shock wore off, it was replaced by a sense of quiet purpose. I had one final piece of business to attend to. I sat at my desk and tallied up the final costs. I paid the prorated invoices from the vendors without argument. The photographer, the band, the caterer, they had all performed a portion of their duties, and I was a woman who paid her debts. The total expenditure was still immense, a staggering blow to the portfolio Robert and I had so carefully built. But as I looked at the final figure, I didn't feel loss. I felt closure. It was the price of my freedom. With the last check signed and mailed, I looked around the large family home. Every room was saturated with memories, both happy and, now, deeply painful. The dining room, where I had been presented with the bill for my own humiliation. The living room where Clara had first introduced me to Marcus. It was too big, too empty, too full of ghosts. It was a house built for a family, and my family, as I had known it, was gone. On an impulse, I called a real estate agent Margaret had recommended. A week later, a for sale sign was hammered into the front lawn, next to the sturdy oak tree. The decision felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. While the house was on the market, I took stock of my life. I went through old boxes, photo albums, and letters. I cried for the husband I missed and for the daughter I had lost. But as I sorted through the remnants of my past, I began to rediscover myself. I found pictures of myself in my 20s, full of life and dreams of my own. I found old travel brochures for trips to Italy and Greece that Robert and I had always planned to take someday. A new feeling began to take root in my heart, nestled right beside the grief, hope. The house sold surprisingly quickly, and for a good price. After settling my accounts and putting aside a comfortable reserve, I was left with a substantial sum. Not the small fortune it once was, but more than enough for a new life. I didn't want another big house. I wanted simplicity, beauty, and peace. I remembered a trip Robert and I had taken years ago to a small coastal town, a quiet place with a rugged shoreline and the constant, soothing sound of the ocean. I went online and found a listing for a modern, 2-bedroom condominium with a wide balcony overlooking the sea. I bought it without a second thought. Moving was a purge. I sold or donated most of the heavy, dark furniture that had filled the old house. I kept only the things that brought me joy, my books, Robert's armchair, a handful of cherished photographs. My new home was filled with light, clean lines, and the salty scent of the ocean breeze. I spent my mornings walking on the beach, and my afternoons reconnecting with old friends like Margaret, who came to visit often. I started taking a painting class, something I had wanted to do for 30 years. I booked a 2-week cruise to Alaska, the first of many trips. I was building a life that was entirely my own, on my own terms. One afternoon, about 6 months after the wedding, a letter with Clara's handwriting arrived. My heart gave a familiar lurch, but it was followed by a sense of calm detachment. I opened it. It was a stilted, awkward apology, full of "I'm sorry if you felt," and it was a difficult day for everyone. It spoke of the humiliation they had faced, the friendships they had lost after the incident. It mentioned that Marcus's parents had refused to help them financially, and that they were struggling with the mortgage on their ostentatious apartment. Tucked into the end was a hesitant question about whether we could talk sometime. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it on my desk. There was no rage left in me, no desire for revenge. But there was no desperate pull to fix things, either. The old Eleanor would have been on the phone in an instant, offering comfort, offering money, offering to smooth things over. The new Eleanor simply picked up her paintbrush. She knew that forgiveness might come one day, but reconciliation would require true, demonstrated change from Clara, not just a plea for help when her other resources had run dry. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The leather-bound book, my gift, sat on the small table beside me. I had kept it. It was my history, my legacy. I felt a profound sense of peace. I had lost a daughter, yes, but I had found myself. I had learned, in the most brutal way possible, that my value was not determined by my utility to others. It resided within me. I raised my glass to the fading light, to Robert, and to the quiet, beautiful, and blessedly independent future that stretched out before me. The silence in my new home wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of the waves, and it was the sound of my own freedom.